Hey, there we go. Hi, my name's Dale. I'm here to talk about distributed stuff. In particular, distributed teams or distributed engineering. Hands up who here works for a company that is not headquartered here in Armenia. Awesome. This should be useful to you. Hopefully useful to you. Is there a trick to this? Back of the clicker. The- No, still doesn't work. Who needs slides? Oh. Actually, I need slides. So. That wasn't me. I didn't do that. Nor that. Yay, there we go. So what are we going to be talking about? One, why distributed? Why do we do distributed engineering? And then I'll run through the stages of building a distributed team, running a distributed team, and then maintaining the distributed team. And they're all fairly different stages in the life cycle. So let's start with me. Why am I here talking about this? That's a good question. My background, I'm a nerd by trade. I have now 18 years experience as being a professional nerd. The last 10 of those have been in some sort of leadership capacity. CTO, manager, director, something along those lines. I had a startup back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that went really well and then went really poorly. Thanks.com. That startup was in the financial services space in Sydney. Because of that, and Sydney has a fairly large financial services industry, I stayed in finance. For anyone here working in finance? Apart from you? I'm sorry. So I spent a good 10, 12, 13, 14 years or so working in finance and financial services in Sydney and London. As an engineer, as a tech lead, as a team lead, as a manager, and then eventually as a CTO. In the CTO position, I was running teams in Sydney, in Shenzhen, in China, in Bangkok, in Thailand, and also a small team in Chicago, where the company was headquartered. So that was very distributed. Thankfully, I got out of finance. Rafi was kind enough to extract me from that world and relocate me to New York, where I headed up the platform engineering group for Twitter. So that was a remote office, a distributed office from headquarters. So I ran a team there. That ran for about 2 years, and I got a little bit bored and decided to try something new. So I'm now at Facebook. Again in New York, I run a team, the messaging infrastructure team. So if anyone here uses Facebook, who uses Facebook? Awesome. Never heard of it? Dead to me. Who uses Messenger? Yes. Awesome. Okay. So maybe, sort of, okay. My team runs the infrastructure behind Messenger. They're based in New York. They're also based in Menlo Park, headquarters for Facebook. They're also based in Seattle. So it's a fairly distributed team. So over these years, I've learned some stuff. Not everything, and this isn't a solved problem. So what I'm going to present here is a bunch of things that have worked for me in forming teams, running them, and then maintaining them. Hopefully you'll get some value from this. If not, I'm sorry. Puppy. It's my puppy. Why distributed teams? So we've touched on this before. Generally speaking, the best talent in the world is not always going to be in your backyard. So for companies that are headquartered in Silicon Valley or New York or anywhere else, the best talent is not necessarily going to be in that location. The best talent is around the world. So a distributed team, having engineers in other parts of the world, I don't think is a luxury anymore, it's a necessity. I want to make a distinction between remote versus distributed. So by distributed team, I mean something like Facebook or Twitter, which has critical mass in an office outside of headquarters. That's a little bit different from a remote team, where everyone is typically by themselves. Most of what I talk about here is applicable to both of these. Some of these are more relevant to distributed, some are more relevant to remote. I'll try and highlight those where I can. If you have any questions during this, please just shout them out. So, let's start with building teams. And thankfully, some of my previous presenters have already talked about some of these things, so it's good that we're on the same page, hopefully. Building a team. A couple of things you want to do. 1, cross-functional teams. 2, hire people, and I'll explain what all these mean in a sec. 3, avoid asymmetry. Asymmetry is bad, hybrid is bad, critical mass is good. I have a rule of 3. It's not so much a rule, more a guideline, but I prefer the term rule because it sounds good. And last one is autonomy. So let's dive into these. Cross-functional teams. So David talked about, in his last slides in the epilogue, about the 7 plus or minus 2, and what should the composition of that be? And I agree 100%. It should be a cross-functional team. You shouldn't have just a bunch of engineers or just a bunch of designers or just a bunch of PMs. You want a team that can solve problems for you, that can satisfy the requirements of the business, that can ship products. And you need more than just engineers to ship products. You need more than designers, you need them all. So you should definitely try and hire across the board. Ultimately, you want to localize decision making. So you want to avoid as many cross-country hops as you can to actually make a decision on what color to make the application, or how should it scale, or when should we launch. There's also 2 other benefits. One is diversity. So you get diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of almost everything. And that really helps. I think diverse teams are typically higher performing. And the other one is you get a bigger talent pool, right? If you're just hiring from engineers, then you can only hire from the engineering pool. If you are hiring designers and PMs and TPMs and everything else, you're hiring from a much wider base. There we go. People. You want to hire people. And what I mean by that is distributed teams and remote teams in particular, you have the need to over-communicate things. So what you tend to do is look for people who are good at communicating, who like to over-communicate. And this is particularly relevant for remote teams. There's this misconception that remote engineers are typically like introverts who don't like to interact with people. My experience has been the opposite of that. Remote engineers or remote workers don't always exhibit that, and in fact, rarely exhibit that. The reason why they're remote is for other reasons, lifestyle choices, something else. So where possible, try and hire people that enjoy communicating, because it's going to be a big part of their job. So what do I mean by asymmetry or hybridness? Asymmetry is where you might have the majority of a team in one location and one person in some other location. That's not good. Hybrid is where you might have some people distributed, some people remote, some people in headquarters. That again is bad. This is not setting it up for success. Why is that? Communication mainly. If you have the majority of people in one location and then one lone person somewhere else, a lot of casual conversation and casual decision making is going to happen in that other location. And the person that's not there is going to be missing out. On to my rule of 3. So this is similar to what David was talking about the 7 plus or minus 2, except mine's 3, but same. When you're hiring for a distributed team, you should be aiming to hire 3 people at the get-go. If you don't have 3 immediately, have an immediate plan to do so. There is nothing worse than being the lone engineer on a distributed team. You want to make sure they have someone to bounce ideas off, someone to talk to, someone to bond with, have a relationship with. Why 3? Because it's the smallest number, larger than 2? I don't know. I think 3 makes sense because you want to account for people taking leave or attrition or whatever else. If you only have 2 people, 1 person takes leave, you're alone. If you have 3 people, at least there's someone else to bounce ideas off. And this rule of three extends not just to people, but also to teams and then groups as you scale. Yes, question? So the question was 3 engineers or 3 people of any background. 3 people of any background is fine. Whatever you're trying to solve, whatever problem you're trying to solve, whatever project you're working on, you want to make sure there's enough people there that can effectively make local decisions to get the product done. So that may be engineers plus designers plus PMs, whatever it takes. And that extends to teams and groups as well. So if you have one team set up, you should have a plan for 3 teams. And ideally those teams should be fairly related in what they do in some way, shape or form. Once you have those teams, in a particular group or business area, you should think about other ones as well. How do you add additional groups? I'll give an example of this at Facebook. So I run the messaging team, the infra team. In New York, we have three different teams on the infra side. So one that deals with the routing of messages, one that deals with caching, and one that deals with storage. So they're all related. They're all part of the one organization, the one messaging group. But they're distinct teams. They have their own goals, their own objectives, their own roadmaps. They work very closely with each other, but they're distinct teams. We also have different groups. So we have, in the infra org, we have messaging infra. There's also iOS infra. There's also low-level network traffic stuff. So these are all infra nerds who like to talk to each other and can benefit from each other's experience. So where possible, try and grow this. Teams of 3 to get go, groups of 3, and keep repeating. Autonomy. So we've talked about autonomy a little bit, and I think it's really, really important. Project selection is really, really, really fucking important for this to make it work. Can I swear? Yeah, I did. Okay, cool. It's very important. What you want to do is try and maximize co-location. You want to minimize as many round trips as possible for decision making. So pick a project that is reasonably self-contained. So in doing that, how do you avoid silos? So you take this component, this widget, this piece of software, whatever it is, and give it to a team somewhere else. They go off and do that stuff. How do you avoid that turning into a silo? Well, the downside of that is you need to make sure you're communicating back up the chain. You need to make sure there is someone on the hook for communicating what's happening in that team back to other parts of the business. I've typically found tech leads really good for this. Tech leads are typically more broad than deep, ironically. And they've done a particularly good job of keeping the rest of the groups up to date and informed about what's going on. So we've built our team. That's awesome. How do we go about running the team? So it's a few topics: communication, trust, time zones, and the dreaded process word. Process. It's my puppy again, begging for bacon. Communication. So as a distributed or remote team, you want to over-communicate. You don't have the luxury of being at headquarters with hundreds or thousands of employees. You don't have these sort of casual interactions at the water cooler. So you need to make sure you're over-communicating stuff. And that includes both communication back to headquarters or back to other groups, but also within yourself. One of the things I found useful is to try and set the same level, the same bar for communication for everyone on the team. So you want consistency. So if you're all remote, then you have to communicate asynchronously via some sort of text medium because you can't guarantee when someone's going to be around. That's a pretty good bar to set. Group chat is a good way to do this. I found, interestingly, that the health of a distributed team can usually be determined by the health of their group chat. The more chat that's going on, the sort of more tightly or more cohesive the group is. I don't know if that's proven or anything, or if it's scientific, but I've observed that in many places. So you've got group chat for work stuff and what's going on and communication of everything else. You also want to make sure there's a more casual chat for posting GIFs of cute puppies begging for bacon, whatever it might be. So you want this water cooler chat. That serves 2 purposes. One, it's good to post memes about stuff because they're awesome. But two, it also allows people to sort of build those relationships with each other. It's good to have that avenue to communicate. Trust. Trust is probably the cornerstone to any team, whether you are remote, whether you're distributed, or whether you are sitting next to each other. So there's a couple of things that I think really help here. One is it's important to get together regularly, in person. And another example of what Facebook does, I think, particularly well here is when we onboard or hire new people, no matter what office they're actually destined for, they spend 2 weeks in Menlo Park to learn how Facebook works and to make relationships with people that they'll be working with and also they may be working with in future. And then they fly back home for 2 weeks. Then they come back to Menlo Park again. So we do 2 weeks in headquarters, 2 weeks in your home office, 2 weeks headquarters, 2 weeks home office. And so that 4 weeks you spend away from your family, away from your home office, is good for building relationships with people that you're going to be working with a lot in the future. So I highly recommend, wherever possible, get together regularly. My teams do quarterly offsites. So all the team members go somewhere offsite from all locations and just get to know each other. Relationships matter. Trust is built on relationships, and you need to have positive relationships for this to work. So you need to make sure you invest in these relationships and give them time to actually grow. I just put this here because I love this image. Time zones, how do they work? I'm victim to this myself right now. Time zones suck at the best of times. You need to be aware of them. So this may involve a little bit of flexibility. So if you're working with a team in, I don't know, from San Francisco to Dublin, there's not always a huge overlap of time there. So you may need to compensate from that. So, maybe work a little bit late, come in early. You need to be aware and conscious of the time zones of the people you're working with and compensate accordingly. Process. So, process gets a really bad rap. Process is not a dirty word. Think about process as how you get shit done. That's all it is. It's not prescriptive, it's just how you get shit done. So, the first thing you should do is try and level the playing field. So I mentioned this before with communication style. It's really discouraging if half the team is using group chat and half the team is relying on face-to-face communication to talk about what's going on. So you want to make sure you level the playing field for everyone involved. I mentioned that hybrid teams are painful, so having one person not there, not present, whether it be electronically or physically, is really bad, so try and avoid that. And the last thing, I think we touched on this in Lena's talk. You want to monitor the work, not the people. So whether somebody gets in early or gets in late or is offline a lot or online, that doesn't matter, right? All you care about is the project shipping? Is the software shipping? Are we making traction on this? Are we having impact? So monitor the work, not the workers. There you go. Puppy in a bag. Another puppy in a different bag. This is also my puppy. I have 2 of them. These slides serve no purpose other than to show pictures of my puppies. It's a long trip to get here. Okay, so we've talked about building team. We've talked about running a team. How do we maintain it? In particular, how do we maintain it when things don't go smoothly? So the first thing is communication. We need to make sure we're always communicating, over-communicate as a team, both internally and externally. We talked about trust a little bit. I think trust is the cornerstone for all relationships and the cornerstone for successful teams. You need to assume trust and best intent for people that are not near you. It's really easy to get into a habit of assuming that someone on the other side of the world is an idiot because you don't agree with what they did, or you don't understand the reasons or motivation for why they did what they did. Don't do that. That's bad. Assume trust, assume best intent. Communicate with them. Talk to them, understand why they did what they did. That will help. Maintain active dialogue. So when things do go poorly, we typically turn to the people closest to us to discuss it, because they're sympathetic. We don't typically reach out to someone on the other side of the planet or on the side of the country. That also is bad. That creates an us versus them type mentality. So whenever there's a problem, I encourage you to reach out to people outside of your local network. Bounce ideas off them. Talk to them. See what's going on. Relationships matter. I said that before. All of this is possible because of relationships. In order to be successful at work, you need to have strong working relationships with people. Make sure you invest time into those relationships. So I mentioned like offsites. They're really awesome. They're awesome for two reasons. One, they get you in the same locations as each other, and you can bond. But two, they allow for serendipitous events. And what I mean by that is some of the best ideas come from when you're just idly talking about bullshit, right? You're not talking about work. You're on a road trip, killing time, and you start talking about stuff. And some of those moments are actually really beautiful. And you want to try and encourage that. And it's very hard when you're remote, so you want to make sure you have that opportunity for people to come together. It's difficult when you're distributed, because again, you make sure you get all the people together to do this. But you want to make sure you invest and give the opportunity for these to grow. And lastly, apologize and forgive. And also be apologetic, accept apologies, accept forgiveness, and be forgiving. Things will inevitably go wrong. It's the way of life. That's okay. Be humble, apologize, talk to the people, and move on. This is all about sort of psychology of being apart, psychology of being remote. It's hard. Being away from headquarters, being away from the center of things is really difficult. So you need to make sure you try and overcompensate for it and invest in it where you need to. Who here is a leader in a sort of distributed or remote engineering office? Awesome. This should be relevant for you then. You're a role model. So your actions and behavior determines the actions and behavior of your staff. So you need to be aware of that and act and behave accordingly. So you need to be the one that proactively reaches out in times of crisis. You need to be the one that forgives or apologizes or accepts an apology when something goes wrong. You need to be the one that over-communicates. You need to be the one that sort of drives this through. People will model your behavior. Site leadership, which may be relevant to some of you, is super, super important. Having someone who is responsible for the health of the site beyond the health of a team or a group is really important. To understand like the broader context of what's going on and to help you grow those. The last one is community engagement. If you have the opportunity to engage in the community, I highly recommend you do it. It's good for brand awareness, so that's awesome, but also keeps you really, really humble. So wherever possible, I encourage you to engage in communities, meetups, tech talks, host people at your company, whatever it is. Be more involved in the community. Thank you. That's a great question. That's a great question. I'm not here on behalf of Facebook. I'm here on behalf of myself. I haven't personally thought about opening a team in Armenia. But if there's the talent here, I think it makes sense. I said before that the best talent is not in your backyard. The best talent is around the world. And there's no reason why companies can't invest in Armenia to bring some of that talent to those companies.
being where forgiveness there are kindness, there are everything, but where are the boundaries where you say that this is enough, you don't belong to this team or something? Is this happens, or how it happens? How do you know that this is the end?
That's a great question. And I think the two things are a little bit separate. So what I was talking about with forgiveness and apologizing is when you make a mistake, when you do something inadvertently that fucks over someone else. You should always be looking to hire the best people you can. As a result, you should always be looking to hire out the worst performers on your organization. I think that's an active process. So it's not about forgiving someone for being incompetent. If someone's incompetent, they shouldn't be working there. So you should always be investing in that. You should always be trying to sort of up-level your team, your group, your company, always. Lady in the front row.
Follow up on the Armenia question. When you are thinking about opening an office somewhere, what are the factors that you consider?
The factors we look at in opening offices outside of headquarters, opportunity and talent. So, Facebook has offices in London because there's a huge European community there around mobile. Sorry, David. Offices in Tel Aviv through acquisition, offices in New York for like East Coast talent pool, office in Dublin for ops. So basically it's around finding the right talent. The problem that Facebook and a lot of large companies have in Silicon Valley is they can't find enough people. There are just not enough people in the Bay Area to satisfy their needs. So they need to look elsewhere. So we're going to look to, where are the best engineers in the world? Where are the best ops people in the world? Where are the best designers in the world? Where are the best project managers? Whatever it might be that we're looking for. Find those pockets or those pools, and then start looking how to invest in that country. Sure.
Yep. While gathering new team, what is the ratio of the experts that you are searching for and the newbies? For example, how many are there newcomers that you want to teach and you are willing to teach to them?
That is an awesome question. That's a book-worthy question. So the question was, what of the people you're hiring, how many should be experts or subject matter experts or senior engineers versus the more junior people that can be taught? So that's a really interesting problem to solve. I'd like to think that you want to try and find someone with seniority, someone with some sort of subject matter expertise to start seeding a team or seed a group. Now, that person may be local or they may be relocating from somewhere else to seed the teams. I know a lot of companies who do this reasonably well. They'll pick up a few senior engineers and then use them to seed other groups or other teams in other offices, and then build teams around them. So once you have that sort of seniority and that expertise, you can then teach the rest of the team how that works. You can then start hiring more junior engineers, more junior resources, and help sort of grow and mold them into what you need. Yep. So I didn't hear that.
How old are your puppy?
How are my puppies? Thank you for asking. My puppies are great. So I have two puppies. Daisy, which is the fawn or blonde-coloured one, she's 2 years old. And then Milo, who's the brindle one. He's now 4 months old. He's a bit of a nightmare, being a puppy. But that's also a book-worthy question, surely. Thank you.
Thanks.